blood tastes like copper and regret. When the open palm of a billionaire's daughter collided with Kendra's cheek, the ballroom gasped. They saw a maid in a stained uniform. They didn't see the diamond ring hidden on a chain around her neck, nor the dead man walking behind them. Truffle oil, ozone from weeping ice sculptures, and the sour tang of nervous sweat. These were the smells that made up the invisible barrier between the servers and the served. Kendra shifted her weight, ignoring the dull, persistent ache in her lower back. The cheap orthopedic shoes she wore squeaked faintly against the polished marble floor of the grand ballroom, a harsh contrast to the silent glide of the designer heels surrounding her. She hated the collar of this uniform. It was heavily starched, scraping against her neck every time she turned her head. Her dark braids were pulled back into a severe, tight bun that made her scalp throb. She balanced a silver tray loaded with flutes of vintage champagne, her knuckles turning a slightly lighter shade of brown under the strain. She didn't have to be here. That was the thought that kept her sane, beating a steady rhythm against her ribs. She didn't have to wear the scratchy polyester. She didn't have to stand invisible in corners while men in custom tuxedos talked over her as if she were a piece of furniture. Gabriel had told her to quit. "You don't have to serve these parasites," he had murmured just 3 nights ago, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw in the dark of his penthouse. "Let me take care of you." But Kendra had refused. Being a maid was grueling, thankless work, but it was real. It was a life she understood. Stepping fully into Gabriel's world, a world of corporate espionage, blood on pristine carpets, and cold, calculating violence, terrified her. He was the head of the city's most ruthless syndicate, a man who had buried his Korean birth name along with his father, choosing Gabriel because he liked the implication of delivering final judgments. To the city, he was a venture capitalist. To the underworld, he was a god. To Kendra, he was the man who had slid a 4-carat emerald-cut diamond onto her finger in a quiet, empty noodle shop at 3 a.m. That ring currently sat heavy and warm against her sternum, suspended on a thick titanium chain hidden beneath her white undershirt. It was a secret anchor. As long as it was hidden, she was just Kendra, just a girl trying to pay off her mother's medical debts, ignoring the fact that those debts had mysteriously vanished from the hospital's registry 2 days after she said yes. "Keep moving, Kendra. Table 4 is dry," hissed Mr. Harrison, the floor manager. He smelled of cheap peppermint and nicotine. He didn't look at her face. He looked at the tray. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice flat, devoid of the sarcasm she usually reserved for Gabriel. She stepped back into the fray. The ballroom was stifling despite the massive air conditioning units pumping frigid air from the vents. A string quartet played a lethargic rendition of something classical in the corner, entirely drowned out by the harsh, braying laughter of the city's elite. That was when she saw her. Chloe. Chloe was a fixture at these events. Heiress to a shipping fortune, she was a striking blonde who smelled overwhelmingly of expensive tuberose perfume and gin. Right now, Chloe was standing near the center of the room. Her face flushed a blotchy red, screaming silently into her cell phone. She was visibly intoxicated, swaying slightly on silver stilettos that looked more like weapons than footwear. Kendra calculated the trajectory. She needed to cross to table 4, which meant giving Chloe a wide berth. Unpredictable drunks were the bane of a server's existence. Kendra tightened her grip on the silver tray, the metal digging into her palm, and began her detour. She was 3 feet away when Chloe suddenly shrieked into the phone, spun on her heel, and marched backward, blinded by her own rage. Kendra tried to pivot. Her rubber sole caught on a microscopic slick of spilled water. She twisted, pulling the tray back, but it was too late. Chloe's shoulder slammed hard into Kendra's chest. The impact knocked the wind out of Kendra. The tray tilted. Gravity did the rest. 3 flutes of champagne toppled. The pale golden liquid cascaded through the air in slow motion, splashing violently against the back of Chloe's custom pale silk gown. The glass shattered against the marble. The sound was a sharp, jagged tear in the low hum of the ballroom. Chloe froze. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. The string quartet missed a note, squeaking horribly before trailing off into dead silence. Kendra scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering a frantic beat against the titanium chain under her shirt. Habit took over, the ingrained survival-driven reflex of the service industry. She grabbed a cloth from her apron. "I'm so sorry, Mum, let me—" Chloe turned slowly. Her eyes were bloodshot, smeared with expensive mascara. She looked at the wet stain spreading across her silk dress, then looked up at Kendra. Her upper lip curled in a snarl of pure, unadulterated disgust. "You stupid, clumsy bitch," Chloe hissed. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden quiet of the room, it carried like a gunshot. Kendra stopped, the cloth hovering in the air. The insult stung, a hot prick behind her eyes, but she swallowed it down. "Mom, you backed into—" She didn't finish the sentence. Chloe's arms swung back. The movement was a blur of diamonds and pale skin. The palm of Chloe's hand connected with the left side of Kendra's face. The slap sounded like a whip cracking across the cavernous room. Heat exploded across Kendra's cheek. It wasn't just a sting, it was a deep, resonating shockwave that rattled her teeth and sent a high-pitched, piercing ring straight into her left ear. Her head snapped to the side from the sheer force of the blow. She staggered back a step, her vision blurring at the edges. She tasted copper. Her teeth had caught the soft flesh of her inner lip. For a second, the world felt completely detached. Kendra stared at the intricate pattern of the marble floor, watching a single bead of blood fall from her mouth and splatter against the white stone. She didn't feel the righteous anger of a movie heroine. She didn't have a sharp, cutting comeback ready on her tongue. Instead, she felt a sickening, hollow wave of humiliation. She felt exactly like what Chloe thought she was. Nothing. Just a uniform. Just a dark face to be struck when inconvenient. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Nobody moved. The elite simply watched, some with wide eyes, others with quiet, entertained smirks. "Do you have any idea how much this dress costs?" Chloe's voice escalated from a hiss to a shrill scream, the alcohol fueling her rage. "It's worth more than your miserable life. Look at you. You're disgusting. You're fired. I want you arrested for destruction of property." Kendra slowly brought a trembling hand to her face. Her dark skin was already radiating heat, a raised welt forming under her fingertips. She looked up at Chloe. Mr. Harrison broke from the crowd, his face pale and sweating profusely. He practically shoved Kendra aside to get to Chloe, grabbing Kendra's upper arm in a vice-like grip as he did. "Miss, I am so deeply sorry," Mr. Harrison babbled, bowing his head. "She is incompetent. She will be terminated immediately. Please, allow us to pay for the dry cleaning." "Dry cleaning?" Chloe screeched, stepping forward to point a manicured finger an inch from Kendra's nose. It's ruined! Get her out of my sight before I call the police. Actually, don't. Hold her here. I am pressing charges. Mr. Harrison's fingers dug painfully into Kendra's bicep. Apologize, he hissed in her ear, his breath hot and stale. Get on your knees and apologize right now. Kendra's breath hitched. The physical pain in her cheek was fading into a dull throb, replaced by a cold, creeping realization. The heavy ring on the chain seemed to burn against her chest. She looked at the faces in the crowd. They were waiting for the show to finish. They were waiting for her to break. She opened her mouth, the words of submission rising to her tongue entirely out of habit, out of the exhaustion of fighting a world that always won. Then the temperature in the room dropped. It wasn't the air conditioning. It was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. A sudden, suffocating pressure that made the hairs on the back of Kendra's neck stand up. At the far end of the ballroom, the heavy oak doors leading to the VIP mezzanine didn't just open. They were shoved apart by two massive men in dark suits. They stepped inside, their faces devoid of expression, and took up positions on either side of the frame. The crowd near the stairs instinctively parted, stepping back as if avoiding a sudden fire. Gabriel walked through the doors. He wasn't running. He didn't look angry. He moved with the slow, terrifying deliberation of a predator that had already locked onto its kill. He wore a charcoal wool suit that cost more than the catering company's annual budget, cut perfectly to the broad, athletic lines of his frame. His dark hair was styled back, save for one stray lock that fell over his forehead. A thin, pale scar caught the chandelier light just beneath his strong jawline. He exuded a scent of cold cedar and expensive tobacco, cutting right through the stale air of the room. Kendra stopped breathing. She knew that look. It was the blank, empty expression he wore when he was deciding how to dismantle someone's life. Gabriel's dark eyes scanned the room and instantly found her. He saw the shattered glass. He saw Mr. Harrison's hand gripping her arm. And, from 50 feet away, he saw the faint trace of blood on her lip and the unnatural stillness in her posture. He began to walk toward them. His footsteps were completely silent on the marble, which somehow made his approach infinitely more terrifying. Chloe, noticing the sudden shift in the crowd's attention, turned. When she saw Gabriel, her angry flush vanished, replaced by a desperate, eager smile. She knew him. Everyone in that room knew Gabriel, or at least they knew the terrifying reputation of the quiet venture capitalist whose rivals had a habit of disappearing. Her father desperately needed Gabriel's backing for a new port deal. Gabriel, Chloe breathed out, smoothing her hair and trying to mask her drunken sway. She stepped forward, effectively blocking his path to Kendra. I'm so sorry you had to see this absolute mess. The help here is just completely out of control tonight. Gabriel didn't stop. He didn't slow down. He didn't even look at Chloe. He walked directly past her, his shoulder brushing hers with enough force to make her stumble backward in shock. He stopped directly in front of Kendra. Mr. Harrison, paralyzed by Gabriel's proximity, finally let go of Kendra's arm, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. Gabriel stood there for a long second. He raised a hand, his movements painfully slow, and gently brushed his thumb against the corner of Kendra's mouth. He looked at the smear of crimson on his thumb. When he finally spoke, his voice was a soft, melodic baritone that carried no anger, only an icy, bottomless promise of ruin. Who touched her? Gabriel's question hung in the stale, refrigerated air of the ballroom, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't shouted. It barely registered above a murmur. yet it seemed to vibrate against the crystal glasses left abandoned on the tables. Nobody moved. The collective breathing of 300 socialites had simply ceased. Kendra stared at his chest, at the perfect Windsor knot of his dark silk tie. Her cheek throbbed, a hot, pulsing rhythm that kept time with her racing heart. She wanted to sink into the floor. She hated this. She hated the spectacle, the hundreds of predatory eyes suddenly fixed on her humiliation. Most of all, she hated the terrifying stillness radiating from the man standing inches away. This wasn't the Gabriel who brought her takeout at midnight or rubbed her swollen feet after a 12-hour shift. This was the monster the city whispered about. And right now, the monster was looking at her bruised skin. "Gabriel," Chloe tried again, her voice wavering, pitching an octave too high. She took a clumsy step forward, her silver heel snapping against a shard of broken champagne flute. The sound was deafening. "Gabriel, you're confused. This girl ruined my dress. She assaulted me. I was just—" Gabriel slowly turned his head. He didn't pivot his body, just his neck, the movement so measured and mechanical it made the hairs on Kendra's arms stand up. He looked at Chloe. Chloe's nervous smile died on her face. The flush of gin and adrenaline drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale and sickly under the harsh chandelier light. She swallowed hard, her throat clicking audibly in the silence. "You," Gabriel said. It wasn't a question. It was an indictment. He took one step away from Kendra and closed the distance to the heiress. Chloe physically shrank, her shoulders caving inward as Gabriel's shadow fell over her. Up close, the height difference was imposing. Gabriel looked down at her with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a diseased insect. "Gabriel, please," Chloe stammered, her hands fluttering uselessly near her ruined silk bodice. "My father is waiting for your call about the harbour project. He told me to say hello if I saw you. This is just a misunderstanding with the staff." "Your father," Gabriel repeated softly. His dark eyes flicked down to Chloe's right hand, the hand that had struck Kendra. "Your father has been begging my acquisitions team for a lifeline for 6 months. His shipping company is bleeding capital. He needs my infrastructure. He needs my ports." Chloe nodded frantically, tears of sudden, inexplicable panic welling in her heavily lined eyes. Yes, exactly. We're business partners." "We were," Gabriel corrected. His voice dropped another fraction, a blade dragging across velvet. "Until 30 seconds ago." He didn't reach into his pocket. He didn't pull out a phone to make a dramatic call. He simply raised his left hand and snapped his fingers once. By the mezzanine doors, one of the massive men in a dark suit tapped an earpiece, gave a single nod, and stepped out into the hallway. "The deal is dead," Gabriel stated, staring blankly at Chloe's trembling lips. "Your father's credit line will be frozen by morning. The Harbour Union, which answers to me, will strike at dawn. By Friday, your family's stock will be penny fodder. By next month, you won't be able to afford the gin on your breath, let alone this dress." Chloe gasped, a wet, ugly sound. Her legs gave out entirely. She collapsed to her knees, the expensive silk pooling in the puddle of spilled champagne and broken glass. She didn't seem to feel the shards biting into her bare skin. No, Gabriel, you can't." "Why? Because of a maid? Because of a clumsy, stupid—" Gabriel moved so fast it was a blur. He didn't hit her. He didn't even touch her. He simply crouched, his face inches from hers, the sheer violent intent rolling off him in waves. "Say another word," Gabriel whispered. the command devoid of any human warmth. Make a sound, breathe too loudly. Give me an excuse to show these people what I actually do to things that disgust me. Chloe clapped both hands over her own mouth, sobbing silently into her palms, her chest heaving as terror finally overrode the alcohol. Gabriel stood up, smoothing a non-existent crease in his trousers. He turned his back on the weeping heiress as if she had ceased to exist. His gaze swept the room, freezing every voyeur in their tracks. He found Mr. Harrison, who was currently plastered against a decorative pillar, looking as though he might vomit. "Manager," Gabriel called out. Mr. Harrison jolted as if shot. He scurried forward, keeping his head bowed, his cheap shoes slipping slightly on the marble. "Yes, sir. Mr. Gabriel, sir. I apologize profoundly. I will have her arrested. I will—" "You grabbed her arm," Gabriel interrupted. Mr. Harrison stopped dead. The blood rushed from his head so fast he swayed. I was attempting to manage the situation, sir. She was out of line. She is just a temp, sir. A nobody. I didn't know you cared about the catering staff." Kendra closed her eyes. The ache in her cheek was sharp now, but the ache in her chest was worse. She was tired, bone tired. The smell of fear in the room was nauseating, mixing with the cloying tuberose and the sharp ozone. She felt Gabriel's presence beside her again. He stood close enough that the fabric of his sleeve brushed her bare forearm. The heat radiating from him was a sudden, grounding comfort in the chaotic room. Gabriel didn't look at the manager. He looked down at Kendra. For the first time since he entered the room, his expression changed. The dead, shark-like emptiness fractured, replaced by a dark, furious agony as he stared at the red welt blooming across her brown skin. He raised his hands, fingers, calloused from years of violence but startlingly gentle, brushed against the collar of Kendra's stiff, cheap uniform. Gabriel didn't ask for permission. He didn't need to. He unfastened the top 2 plastic buttons of her shirt, his knuckles grazing the hollow of her throat. The crowd watched in mute, morbid fascination. Mr. Harrison let out a soft, confused whimper. Gabriel reached his hand flat against Kendra's sternum. He found the thick titanium chain hidden beneath her undershirt. With a slow, deliberate pull, he drew it upward. The heavy 4-carat emerald-cut diamond cleared her collar. It swung like a pendulum for a fraction of a second before Gabriel caught it in his palm. The chandelier light hit the perfectly cut facets, throwing a blinding, fractured spectrum of light across Gabriel's dark suit and Kendra's stained white apron. It was a ring meant for a queen, hanging against the cheap polyester of a servant. A collective, jagged gasp ripped through the ballroom. The socialites, the businessmen, the servers, every single person understood exactly what they were looking at. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a brand. It was a declaration of absolute, untouchable protection. Mr. Harrison's knees buckled. He didn't fall, but he caught himself against a cocktail table, his face a mask of pure horror. He had aggressively grabbed the arm of the woman who wore Gabriel's ring. He had ordered her to her knees. Chloe, still sobbing on the floor in her champagne-soaked dress, looked up. Her bloodshot eyes locked onto the diamond. Her mouth opened in a silent, grotesque O of despair as the final piece of the puzzle snapped into place. She hadn't just slapped a maid, she had signed her own family's death warrant. Gabriel let the ring drop back against Kendra's chest. The diamond felt incredibly heavy now, burning cold against her skin. "She is not the catering staff," Gabriel said, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. He finally turned his gaze back to Mr. Harrison, his eyes flat and dead again. "She is my fiancée. She is the woman who will own half of this city by the end of the year, and you put your hands on her." "Please," Harrison whispered, tears cutting tracks through the sweat on his face. "Please, I didn't know. Nobody knew." "Ignorance is a temporary condition," Gabriel replied coldly. "Yours is about to become permanent." He looked up at the remaining guard by the door. "Clear the building. Anyone left inside in 5 minutes loses their kneecaps. As for Harrison, put him in the trunk." Chaos erupted. It wasn't loud. Nobody dared scream. But it was a frantic, desperate stampede of silk, velvet, and patent leather as the city's elite scrambled toward the emergency exits and elevators, abandoning coats, purses, and dignity. Gabriel ignored them all. He turned entirely to Kendra. He didn't offer his arm. Instead, he wrapped his hand gently but firmly around the back of her neck, his thumb resting over her pulse point. "We are going home," he said quietly. Kendra didn't argue. The adrenaline was crashing out of her system, leaving her limbs feeling like lead. She let him guide her through the shattered glass, past the weeping Chloe, and out the heavy oak doors. The transition from the freezing, chaotic ballroom to the humid night air of the private parking garage was jarring. The scent of ozone and perfume vanished, replaced by the smell of hot asphalt and exhaust. A black Maybach sat idling by the service elevator, its rear door already held open by a silent driver. Gabriel guided her inside and slid in beside her. The heavy door thumped shut, sealing them in a cocoon of rich leather and soundproof silence. The tinted windows plunged them into near darkness, illuminated only by the passing rhythmic flash of amber streetlights as the car smoothly pulled into the street. Kendra reached up, her trembling fingers finding the stiff, scratching collar of her uniform. She yanked it hard. The cheap threads popped, the collar tearing away from her neck. She threw the scrap of fabric onto the floor mat. She leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes. She could feel him watching her. "You didn't have to bankrupt her," Kendra muttered, her voice rough. Her lip stung where she had bitten it. "She hit you," Gabriel replied. There was no inflection in his tone. To him, the equation was that simple. Cause and effect. "I'm used to people being cruel, Gabriel. I could have handled it." "You shouldn't have to," he said. He shifted closer, the scent of cedar washing over her. He reached out, his warm fingertips gently tracing the swollen line of her cheek. He withdrew a crisp linen handkerchief from his breast pocket and carefully dabbed the dried blood from the corner of her mouth. Kendra opened her eyes. The streetlights painted sharp shadows across his face, highlighting the ruthless angles of his jaw and the faint scar near his chin. He looked dangerous. He was dangerous. "You terrified them," she whispered. "Good," he answered without hesitation. He let his hand slide down, his fingers catching the titanium chain and pulling the heavy diamond out from beneath her shirt once more. He didn't let it go this time. He held it between them, the stone catching the faint city light. "No more uniforms, Kendra. No more hiding. From tomorrow, they all know exactly who you are." Kendra looked at the ring, then up into the dark, obsessive eyes of the man who had burned down a ballroom for her. She was terrified of his world, of the blood and the shadows. But as he pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her dark braids, she let out a long, shaky breath and closed her eyes. She wasn't running anymore. Don't forget to hit that like button if you loved the explosive satisfaction of Gabriel destroying Chloe's world and protecting his queen. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story of mafia romance, betrayal, and revenge. Drop a comment below. Did Gabriel go too far, or did the heiress get exactly what she deserved? Share this video with your fellow drama lovers and stay tuned for more intense, raw storytelling coming your way soon.